"You're dead to me now." For a moment, I didn't breathe. His voice sliced through the quiet of my living room, sharp enough that my fingers curled against the arm of the couch. A faint ringing filled my ears, like the air itself had recoiled from his words. The phone screen dimmed, but the echo of his anger stayed bright and brutal. I sat very still, feeling the room tilt around me. The lamp beside me flickered, casting a cold sheen across the hardwood floor, and I caught my reflection in the window, stunned, small, almost unrecognizable. I had spent the night before trying to hold myself together while my daughter and I sat with the woman he used to call his wife, the mother of his children. Now, in the harsh light of morning, he had decided that made me unforgivable. He hadn't even asked why. He hadn't asked anything at all. I remember tightening my grip on the couch fabric, feeling its worn texture beneath my nails just to keep myself anchored. A single breath escaped me, shaky, embarrassing in its fragility. I whispered, barely audible even to myself, "He really meant it." The house felt colder than it should have, sunlight creeping through the blinds in thin, pale stripes that did nothing to warm the air, the kind of light that exposes instead of comforts. Dust floated lazily in it, suspended, untouched by the chaos pulsing inside me. I stood up slowly, knees aching more than usual, the weight of everything settling deep into my bones. I walked toward the kitchen, needing something, tea, water, anything, to steady my hands. But even the clink of the mug against the counter made my shoulders flinch. His words kept replaying, "You're dead to me now." Not once had he paused. Not once had he softened. My own son. I rubbed at the ache blooming behind my ribs. It felt as if something had crawled into my chest and lodged itself there, heavy, refusing to move. I tried to breathe around it. I thought of the years I had spent praying he'd grow into a kinder man, the countless evenings I defended him when others saw the cracks long before I did. I remembered the newborn he once was, tiny, red-faced, gripping my finger with all the trust in the world, a memory so distant now it felt like someone else's life. The kettle clicked off and the sudden silence pressed sharply against my ears. I didn't pour the water. I just stood there, staring at my own trembling shadow on the tile floor. My daughter's footsteps began upstairs a moment later, slow, hesitant, like she sensed something had broken downstairs. I didn't call up to her. I couldn't yet. If I opened my mouth, I wasn't certain what sound would come out. Last night, we'd taken his ex-wife, sweet, exhausted, trying so hard to pretend she didn't hurt, to a small diner on the edge of town. My daughter cracked soft jokes, trying to loosen the tightness in the young woman's face, and I watched her shoulders slowly lower from around her ears. I watched her breathe again. She'd been so grateful I hadn't gone to the wedding. Her voice had wavered when she told me she didn't expect that kind of loyalty from anyone anymore. Her eyes had shimmered in a way that made me want to protect her the way no one had protected her in years. Now he wanted me to regret that choice. My phone buzzed on the counter and I flinched at the vibration. Turning slowly as if approaching something dangerous. Another message from him. 5 words, just 5. "You chose her over me." The accusation pulsed against the screen like a fresh bruise. I swallowed hard. The floor under my feet felt unsteady again, as though it had thinned and hollowed out. My breath fogged faintly on the cold air, maybe from the open window above the sink, maybe from my own rising panic. I didn't answer him. Not because I didn't have words, but because the right ones refused to form. A part of me wanted to scream. Another part wanted to curl into myself and disappear. Instead, I set the phone down gently, almost tenderly, as if I could soften the blow by refusing to meet it with equal force. I heard my daughter pause halfway down the stairs. "Mom, you okay?" Her voice drifted to me through the quiet, warm but cautious. I closed my eyes. My throat tightened. I wasn't ready to give the truth shape. Not yet. I turned away from the phone and from her, gripping the back of a kitchen chair as the morning light shifted across the floor. My heartbeat thumped heavily against my sternum, slow at first, then harder, like it was trying to break free. Because beneath all the hurt, something else was starting to stir. Something cold, small, sharp-edged, a realization forming in the quiet spaces between his words. If he could cut me off so quickly, so completely, if he could declare me dead without hesitation, what would he do next? The thought slithered through me, leaving a chill behind it. I straightened slowly, fingers tightening around the wooden chair until it creaked. I knew my son's anger. I knew how far he could push it. But this felt different. And as the silence stretched thinner and thinner around me, something unsettling flickered across the edge of my instincts. There was more coming. I could feel it. And I wasn't sure I was prepared for the next blow. My son didn't give me time to brace for the next hit. Less than an hour after he told me I was dead to him, my phone buzzed again. This time, not with his name, but with the family group chat lighting up like a siren. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and picked it up, the blue glow cutting through the dimness of the kitchen. New messages stacked on top of one another, his name tagged in almost every one. "Is it true, Mom?" my sister wrote. "I can't believe you skipped your own son's wedding," my brother-in-law added. Then, from an unknown number, "Wow, some mother you turned out to be." My thumb hovered over the screen, frozen. He hadn't called to explain his version to me, but he had clearly been busy explaining it to everyone else. Behind me, my daughter reached the bottom of the stairs. "Mom, what's going on?" she asked again, a little louder this time. I turned slowly. "He's already told them," I said. My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone standing in the next room. She crossed the kitchen in a few quick steps and looked over my shoulder. I watched her eyes move left to right, reading, her jaw tightening as she took in the messages. Her breath left her in a sharp exhale. "Oh, hell no," she whispered. My phone chimed again. A new message from him appeared at the top of the screen. "Everyone knows what you did now. Don't contact me again." The hurt in those words wasn't aimed at himself or his children. It was a blade pointed one way, toward me. My daughter snatched the phone from my hand before I could respond. "You're not answering that," she said. "Not right now." I stared at her, grateful and stunned at the same time. Her hair was still messy from sleep, her sweatshirt hanging off one shoulder, but her eyes were clear, sharp. She had gone to bed my child and woken up my shield. In the living room, the clock on the wall ticked too loudly, each second landing like a little hammer in the silence. I could taste the metallic tang of adrenaline at the back of my throat. "What exactly did he say on the phone?" she asked, softer now. I swallowed. "He told me I'm a horrible father." The old word slipped out of habit, and I corrected myself with a tired sigh. A horrible parent, and this morning, I'm dead to him. She closed her eyes briefly, as if steadying herself. "He really said that?" "He meant it," I said. "He didn't even hesitate." She clenched her jaw so hard I could see the muscle jump near her temple. "He cheats on his wife, blows up his whole family, and we're the ones who betrayed him because we didn't clap at the second wedding." Her voice trembled with anger. I sank into the chair at the table, the wood pressing into the back of my knees. The room had the faint smell of yesterday's coffee and dish soap, familiar scents that suddenly felt foreign in all this tension. The phone buzzed again on the counter. This time, it wasn't family. It was my former daughter-in-law. Her name on the screen hit me harder than any insult. For a split second, my heart dropped, thinking he'd gotten to her too. "Can I call you?" her message read. "If you're not too busy." Too busy, on the morning after his wedding when she knew exactly what I'd chosen. I pressed the call icon before doubt could creep in. The ringing sounded tinny in my ear, and I squeezed the phone tighter to keep my hand from shaking. She answered on the second ring. "Hi," she said. Her voice was careful, tentative. like she was afraid she was intruding. "How are you feeling?" I asked, the question spilling out of me before anything else. "I'm okay," she said, but the word frayed on the edges. "The kids are confused, but they had fun. They love getting dressed up, you know." I could picture them. The little girl in a dress that probably had too much tulle, the little boy tugging at a stiff collar. My grandchildren sitting in a hall watching their father marry someone else, while I sat 3 tables away from their mother in a cramped diner, pretending the world wasn't ripping at the seams. "I'm glad they had you in their corner while we were out," she continued, and She hesitated. "I wanted to say thank you again. For last night. I know you could have gone." I swallowed hard. "There was nowhere else I could have been," I said. For a moment, there was only the sound of her breathing on the other end. Then she spoke again, quieter. "He's angry, isn't he?" "Yes," I said simply. "He is." My daughter leaned against the counter, arms folded, watching me with worried eyes. I could feel the weight of her stare as surely as if her hands were on my shoulders. "He called this morning," I added. "Said I betrayed him. Said I'm dead to him now." There was a sharp intake of breath on the line. "He said that?" "He did." Silence stretched between us, thin and fragile. I could almost hear her thinking, measuring her own guilt against mine, trying to decide whether my choice had destroyed something or revealed something that was already broken. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "You don't deserve that." I closed my eyes. For a brief second, my chest loosened. To be seen, even by someone who owed me nothing, felt like having a hand put gently on a bruise. "Listen," she continued, voice trembling a little. I don't want you to get caught in the middle. If this makes things harder with him, I understand if you need to step back from me and the kids. I don't want to be the reason you lose your son." My eyes flew open. The idea knocked the air out of me. "That's not happening," I said, the words coming out steadier than I felt. "You are the mother of my grandchildren, and you are family. That doesn't evaporate because he decides he's done with a chapter." I heard a choked laugh from her, half relief, half disbelief. "You're the only one who talks like that," she whispered. Before I could answer, another notification flashed across my screen, covering her name for a second. A social media screenshot from my daughter. She had sent it to me with no comment, just the image. A post from my son, public. His profile picture, his full name attached. "Imagine your own parent boycotting your wedding to hang out with your ex instead," it read. "Some people never fail to disappoint. Blood doesn't mean loyalty." Dozens of likes, comments already piling underneath. I felt the floor sway. My daughter met my eyes as I stared at the screen. "He posted it 20 minutes ago," she said quietly. "Everyone's seeing it." My fingers tightened around the phone, the edges digging into my palm. It wasn't enough that he'd turned the family against me privately. Now he was inviting strangers to pass judgment too. On the line, my former daughter-in-law's voice broke through the static. "Is everything okay?" I swallowed. My tongue felt dry, heavy. "He's taking this public," I said, forcing the words out. "He just told the entire world what a disappointment I am." She exhaled shakily. "I'm so sorry," she murmured. "I knew he was upset last night, but I didn't think he'd do that." The humiliation rose hot in my face. My life, my choices, flattened into a bitter paragraph on a screen. For a moment, the urge to justify myself flared sharp. To type out a long explanation under his post, defend the years I had stood by him when no one else did. But underneath the shame, something else was building. A low, steady pressure, like a tide pulling back from shore. "How many people do you think will believe him?" my daughter asked, her voice low, almost afraid of the answer. I looked from the screenshot to her face, then to the thin lines of light cutting across the table. "Enough," I said. "Enough to hurt." My phone buzzed again with a new notification, but I didn't look this time. I set it face down on the table, as if I could suffocate the noise. My daughter pulled out a chair beside me and sat down. "We're not going to let him rewrite the whole story," she said, her hand closing around mine. "Not this time." Her grip was warm, firm. An anchor in the middle of a storm he didn't even know he had started. My chest still ached, my son's words still ricocheted in my head, but as I sat there between my daughter's quiet resolve and my former daughter-in-law's fragile gratitude on the other end of the line, a startling thought crept in. If he was willing to scorch the earth this fast over one boundary, what was he going to do when I refused to bend at all? The answer, whenever it came, was not going to be gentle. When people talk about motherhood, they usually mean the glossy pictures. First steps, school plays, graduation caps tossed in the air. They don't talk much about the envelopes on the kitchen table, the ones that decide whether the lights stay on or the fridge stays full. My whole life with my son seemed to be measured in paper. I still remember one winter evening when he was 8. The house we rented back then was small, one of those old single-story places with thin walls and windows that never quite sealed. Wind slipped through the gaps and made the curtains shiver. The living room lamp cast a warm yellow circle on the coffee table, but outside that pool of light, the corners of the room stayed in shadow. On the table between us lay a creased utility bill, folded and unfolded so many times that the paper had gone soft at the edges. I can still see the red numbers stamped across the top, a warning about disconnection dates. The ink bled a little into the fibers where my fingers had pressed too hard, as if even the paper knew it was carrying bad news. He was on the floor at my feet, sprawled on his stomach with crayons scattered around him. His small hand moved in quick strokes over cheap printer paper, drawing superheroes with wide smiles and capes that never tore. His socks had a hole in the toe, and every so often his big toe would poke through, curling against the cold floorboards. "Mom, do you think they'll let us build a volcano for the science fair?" he asked, not looking up. "I don't see why not," I replied, though in my head I was trying to calculate how many extra shifts I'd need to cover both that bill and whatever volcano supplies his teacher had dreamed up. He pushed his hair out of his eyes with the back of his hand, leaving a faint streak of blue crayon on his forehead. "Can we make it explode? Like with real smoke and everything?" "Smoke we can manage," I said. "Real lava might be harder." He laughed, bright and unburdened. And for a moment the red numbers on the bill blurred. I watched him color, listened to the scratch of wax on paper, the faint hum of the old refrigerator, the ticking of the cheap wall clock. The room smelled like spaghetti sauce and dish soap, ordinary worn-in smells, home in its simplest form. When he finally climbed up onto the couch and leaned against me, his hair still damp from his bath, I slid the bill under a magazine. My thumb left a faint smear of tomato sauce on the corner. It felt like erasing a problem I couldn't really erase. I told myself I'd work it out later. I always did. Years later, I found that same utility bill, tucked in the back of a recipe book, the red ink faded but still visible. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe because it reminded me of that night, of how small he was, of how hard I was trying, of how many invisible weights sat on my shoulders while he drew heroes with crayons and believed I could fix everything. That was the first anchor in a life that slowly filled with paper. When he was 10, the school sent home a permission slip for a field trip, a museum 2 towns over, the first one he'd ever visit. The paper was thin and slightly glossy, pre-creased as if they expected parents to fold it into their wallets. There was a blank line for the child's name, another for the parent's signature, and a box for emergency contact information. He dropped it on the kitchen counter with his backpack, the slip half crumpled from bouncing around all day. "Teacher said if we don't bring it back signed, we can't go," he announced, tearing open a granola bar. "We're going to see dinosaur bones." My hands were still wet from washing dishes. I dried them on a towel, smoothing the paper out carefully. The counter had a faint ring where someone once left a mug too long, and the overhead light flickered every few seconds, dimming, then brightening, like it was catching its breath. The trip cost $15. It wasn't much, not really, but at the time it felt like its own kind of mountain. The note at the bottom said, "If this presents a hardship, please notify the school." I stared at that line for a long moment, then picked up a pen and signed my name anyway. He watched me, swinging his legs against the cabinet door. "Are you going to put down your work number?" he asked. I hesitated, then scribbled it carefully, pressing hard enough that the pen tip left a slight groove in the counter beneath. "If anything happens, they'll call me," I said. "Nothing's going to happen," he replied confidently, crumbs falling onto his shirt. "It's just bones and glass." I smiled, more for myself than for him. Just bones and glass. Just another bill. Just another decision. The world through his eyes was made of straight lines and simple choices. Through mine, it was layers of what if and if not. The morning I slipped that permission slip into his backpack, the sun was just rising, casting a soft pink glow across the kitchen linoleum. He bounced on his toes while I zipped his coat, his breath puffing in short clouds as he talked about the bus and the lunch and which friend he wanted to sit with. I slid the paper into the front pocket of his bag, smoothing it flat one more time. "Don't forget to give it to your teacher," I said. "I won't," he promised, throwing his arms around my waist so hard I took a step back. "Thanks, Mom." He ran down the cracked front steps, backpack bouncing, shoes slapping against the pavement. The air bit at my face. I stood in the doorway watching him until he turned the corner, then went back inside to gather my things for work. The house felt quieter without his chatter, the ticking clock suddenly louder, the morning light a little too pale. All day, as I answered phones and filed forms at the office, that slip of paper sat in the back of my mind. A small thing, easily lost, easily overlooked. Yet it was the difference between my son standing in front of a dinosaur skeleton with wide eyes or staying behind in a classroom with his cheek pressed against his hand, watching others go. Later, when he came home flushed and excited, his words tripping over each other about fossils and gift shop toys and how big the T-Rex skull was, I found myself rolling that memory up and tucking it somewhere deep. Another quiet proof that even the smallest decisions had weight. By the time he was a teenager, the papers had multiplied. Report cards, detention slips, notes from teachers, college brochures. Some of them I filed neatly in a cabinet. Others ended up in a drawer that stuck if you pulled it too hard. A life could be traced in those documents. Grades rising and falling like tides, signatures that started out shaky and grew more confident, all written with the same last name. Then there was the envelope. It wasn't special when I first received it, just a small white thing, the cheapest kind you could buy in a pack of 50. He was 7 when he handed it to me, cheeks pink, eyes darting everywhere except my face. "Don't open it now," he said, pushing it into my hand. "You have to open it later, when you're not mad about the vase." The vase had been a cheap, chipped thing, more sentimental than valuable. He'd broken it playing soccer in the living room even after I'd told him not to. I had raised my voice more from fear than anger, and his eyes had gone wide and wet. That night, after he'd gone to bed and the house had settled into its usual creaks and sighs, I found the envelope on my nightstand. The overhead light cast a soft circle on the worn wood, and I sat on the edge of the bed, fingers tracing the uneven line where he'd tried to seal it. A faint smell of glue and pencil lead rose from it when I finally tore it open. Inside was a single piece of notebook paper, folded twice. In his uneven handwriting, he'd written, "Mom, I'm sorry I broke your vase. I will buy you a new one when I am big and have a job. I love you more than the vase. Please don't be sad. Your son." There was a little stick figure drawing at the bottom. Me with frizzy hair, him with a giant smile, holding what looked like a rectangle that might have been a replacement vase or a television. His sense of proportion was still developing. I remember laughing softly, tears stinging my eyes. The room smelled faintly of laundry detergent and the lemon-scented polish I'd used earlier that day. The streetlight outside cast a pale stripe across the carpet, catching on the discarded sock he'd left near the door. I refolded the note carefully, pressing the creases straight. Then I slid it back into the envelope and tucked it away in the back of my dresser drawer, behind a stack of old sweaters I never wore anymore. Over the years, I moved that envelope from drawer to drawer, from house to house. When we finally bought a place of our own, a small brick house with peeling paint and a narrow driveway, it went into the new nightstand beside my bed. Later, when we swapped furniture and rearranged rooms, it ended up in a box of important things that had no official category. Old photos, a dried corsage, a hospital bracelet from when he was born. Every so often, in moments when the world felt especially heavy, I'd find myself digging for it without even meaning to. My fingers would brush the edge of the paper, worn and softened with time, and I'd slide it out, reading the same crooked lines over and over. I love you more than the vase. As he grew older, the papers changed in tone. College acceptance letters, financial aid forms, loan documents. They came in thicker envelopes with logos in legal language and interest rates printed in small, unforgiving fonts. I signed where I needed to, co-signed where he begged me to, always telling myself I was helping him step into a better life. When he moved 3 states away for college, we packed his clothes, his old comic books, and a shoebox full of cords and chargers he insisted he needed. I slipped that childhood envelope into my own bag without telling him, as if carrying that version of him with me would somehow keep him closer. The day we left him at the dorm, the sky was a flat, washed-out blue, like someone had forgotten to turn the color all the way up. Students rushed past us carrying plastic storage bins and lumpy pillows, laughter and nervous chatter echoing off the concrete. I stood by his new bed, hands smoothing a wrinkle in the comforter he'd chosen, listening to some other mother down the hall tell her son to remember to eat vegetables. He hugged me quickly, already half-turned toward his new roommate. I felt the press of his arms, the faint smell of detergent and youthful excitement, and told myself this was good. This was what we'd worked for. All the bills, all the long days, all the permission slips and late-night study sessions, they had led here. On the drive home, the folder with his financial paperwork slid back and forth on the passenger seat, whispering against the upholstery every time I took a curve. At a red light, I placed my hand on it to stop the movement. The sun slanted through the windshield, warming my knuckles, and for a moment I imagined it was him I was steadying, not just a stack of paper. It's strange, looking back now, how easy it is to line up all those documents and see the shape of our history in them. The creased utility bill that showed how early I learned to stretch nothing into enough. The permission slip that let my son step into a world bigger than our small neighborhood. The envelope that held a child's apology and a promise he probably forgot by the next week. At each point, I chose him, quietly, automatically, without writing my own name anywhere except on the line that said, "Responsible Party." In my mind, there was an unspoken contract. One day, when he was older, when life steadied, he would look back and see all of it. He would remember the late-night studying at the kitchen table, the birthday parties on shoestring budgets, the way I always found a way to sign every paper that mattered. I thought that understanding would be its own kind of repayment. Now, sitting in my kitchen years later with my phone face down on the table and his latest words still burning my ears, I found myself reaching for those memories like someone fumbling for a light switch in the dark, because somewhere between that 7-year-old clutching an envelope and the grown man declaring me dead to him, something had gone terribly, terribly wrong. And as much as it hurt, I knew I was going to have to face exactly when that shift began. The descent didn't happen all at once. It never does. It started with small, sharp edges that didn't look like cruelty until they had already drawn blood. The first time I felt it was the afternoon he told his wife he couldn't do it anymore and moved his things into our garage. He showed up with plastic bins and trash bags instead of proper boxes, dumping them in uneven piles on the oil-stained concrete. The garage smelled like old paint, cut grass, and something metallic from my husband's tools. Light came in through the side window in narrow slats, dust floating lazily in the beams, while my son paced back and forth, phone in hand. "She's crazy," he snapped, not really looking at me. "She wants too much. She nags. She doesn't understand how stressed I am." I stood near the workbench, fingers resting on a cardboard box I recognized, a box that had once held our family documents. The label I'd written years ago in black marker, "Family Papers," was faded and smudged. The edges of the lid were softened by time and handling, corners crushed just slightly from being moved from house to house. Now, shoved beside his hastily packed clothes, it looked like just another thing in his way. "Did you two try to talk?" I asked. I kept my voice steady, careful. Really talk, I mean, not just shout. He rolled his eyes. "You always take her side." "I'm taking your family's side," I said quietly. "That includes you, and her, and those babies." He stopped pacing. For a moment, I saw something flicker across his face. Tiredness, maybe. Doubt. His shoulders dropped a fraction. "I'm just done," he muttered. "I work all day. I don't need to come home to someone who complains about money and diapers and being tired." "You forced her to stay home with the kids," I reminded him gently. "That means there's more on your plate, yes, but there's more on hers, too." He turned to me then, eyes narrowing. "You don't know what it's like now," he said, voice low. "You had it easy. Dad worked. You just did the mom stuff." The words hit harder than he probably meant them to. For a moment, the garage went strangely quiet. I heard the hum of the old fridge we kept out there and the faint chirp of a bird outside. My tongue pressed against the back of my teeth, searching for something to say that wouldn't turn into a scream. He had no idea how many nights I'd sat at our kitchen table with a stack of bills, that creased utility notice under my hand, choosing which ones could wait. No idea how many double shifts I'd taken when his father's hours were cut. "Just the mom stuff," he said, as if that hadn't been the scaffolding holding his whole childhood up. I swallowed the response burning in my throat. The silence stretched, long enough that I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. He looked away first, scoffing, as if my quiet proved his point. That was the first crack, subtle, but deep. Later, after he'd gone back to try for the kids' sake, the visits to our house came with an undercurrent I couldn't ignore. One Saturday, months before the divorce papers were filed, he showed up with both children in tow. It was raining, thin lines of water streaking down the kitchen window, turning the world outside into a gray blur. The kids shook their coats off in the hallway, leaving little puddles on the mat, cheeks rosy from the cold. "Grandma, can we make pancakes?" my granddaughter asked, her eyes bright. "Of course we can," I said, already pulling out the flour. My son dropped into a chair at the table, scrolling on his phone. His knee bounced restlessly. The boy climbed onto his lap, chattering about a cartoon he'd seen, but my son's attention was somewhere else entirely. "You didn't send child support this month?" I said carefully, measuring the ingredients. "She said the rent's due." He didn't look up. "I bought them new clothes," he replied. "That counts." "That was 3 shirts and a pair of shoes," I said, "and your daughter's still wearing tights with holes in them." He huffed. "She can get a job if she wants more." I told her that. "You told her she wasn't allowed to work when the first baby was born," I reminded him, the whisk pausing in the bowl. "You said you wanted a stay-at-home mother for your children." "That was before she started using it as an excuse," he snapped. "I'm killing myself out there, Mom. I can't do it all." I set the whisk down, steadying my hands on the edge of the counter. The rain tapped harder against the glass, the sound filling the silence between us. The kids' voices were a soft backdrop, the boy humming some little tune under his breath as he lined blueberries along the table like tiny soldiers. "You aren't doing it all if she's trapped with no income and no backup," I said finally. You're holding the rope and then blaming her for not climbing it." His head snapped up, eyes flashing. "You think you know everything, don't you?" he said louder now. "You think just because you struggled once, you can judge how I run my family." "I think you're leaving her with nothing but fear," I said. My voice stayed low, but my hands trembled. "And I think you're forgetting what it feels like to be the one without options." He stared at me, lips pressed into a thin line. My granddaughter slid off her chair and tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, are you mad?" she asked. He forced a smile, patting her head. "No, sweetheart," he said. Then he turned that same smile on me, except this time it didn't reach his eyes. "Grandma just likes to be dramatic, that's all." My stomach twisted. He had turned my concern into a performance, reduced years of experience into drama with a single dismissive phrase. In front of my grandchildren, their little eyes shifted between us, confusion flickering across their faces, and I felt something small inside me crack again. It wasn't yelling. It wasn't a slammed door. It was worse. A quiet rewriting of reality, right in front of two children absorbing every tone, every shrug, every forced smile. He started doing that more often, smiling while cutting. When the separation became official, the papers came in thick manila envelopes, custody agreements, support orders, schedules broken into neat, regimented lines. I sat at my kitchen table one evening with a copy of the order spread out in front of me, my reading glasses perched on the tip of my nose. It felt like looking at a blueprint of my grandchildren's future, printed in stark black ink. The language was dry, the implications weren't. Alternating weekends, holidays divided like spoils. The children reduced to a series of pickup times and drop-off locations. My son stood at the counter behind me, arms crossed. "This is ridiculous," he said. "She's getting the kids way more than I am, and I'm paying. For what? To fund her little freedom apartment while she sits on her ass?" I traced one of the lines with my finger, following it from his name to hers, to the signatures at the bottom. My granddaughter's laughter echoed faintly from the living room where she watched a cartoon, unaware that the document in front of me would dictate where she spent Christmas. "You agreed to this," I said, "and you were the one who told her she had to leave." "I didn't tell her she had to leave," he argued. "I told her if she was going to make everything my fault, she could go." "That's not the same thing," I said. He leaned over my shoulder, tapping the paper. "You know what this really is? Punishment. Courts always punish the father, always." I thought of that old permission slip I'd once signed so he could see dinosaur bones, how I'd traced those lines carefully. I looked at his name printed here now, older, more angular, attached to obligations he was already trying to peel away from himself. "You're not being punished," I said quietly. "You're being asked to show up. There's a difference." He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Spoken like someone who's never had to pay anything real," he muttered. It was as if every bill I'd ever stretched and sweated over evaporated in that instant, replaced by his version of history. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. The words sat heavy on my tongue, but my throat refused to let them pass. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. "You know what?" he said, straightening. "Forget it. If you're going to act like her lawyer, I'll stop talking to you about any of this." He walked away without waiting for a response. The sound of his footsteps down the hall echoed far louder than they should have. I sat there with the papers spread out, the edges cutting faintly into my palms, feeling like I'd been dismissed from my own child's life. That was humiliation number 2, quieter but sharper, the kind where you realize the respect you thought you'd earned can be revoked with a shrug. The rest started to happen in front of other people. Our extended family has a bad habit of using gatherings as a stage. It was at one of those gatherings, a birthday party for my niece, that my son decided to turn me into a cautionary tale. We were in my sister's backyard. Kids ran around shrieking, chasing balloons that bumped against the bright sky. Paper plates sagged under the weight of potato salad and overcooked burgers. Someone had strung fairy lights along the fence, and they blinked lazily in the late afternoon. I was sitting at a picnic table, a plastic cup of lemonade sweating onto the wood, when my son plopped down across from me with his new fiancée. She wore a tight smile and a dress that was just a little too fancy for the occasion, the kind of outfit that reminded everyone she was starting fresh, better, shinier. "So," he said loudly, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "We were talking about the wedding and how some people think it's okay to hold grudges forever." My stomach clenched. My sister looked over, sensing a shift. His fiancée laughed, twisting her engagement ring. "Some parents just don't know how to move on," she chimed in. "They get so attached to their version of things." He glanced at me, eyes glinting. "Right, Mom?" The conversation at the next table dipped. People pretended not to listen, which somehow made their presence heavier. "I'm not holding a grudge," I said evenly. "I'm holding a boundary." He rolled his eyes dramatically. "There you go with the therapy words," he said. "You read one article and suddenly you're an expert." His fiancée's smile widened. "Don't worry," she said to the cousin beside her. "He'll come around, he always does. He just needs time to get over the fact that some people leave." Her tone made it clear who some people were. Heat rose in my face. The picnic table, the paper plates, the sticky cups, all of it felt suddenly too small, too exposed. I could feel their eyes on me. The aunts who still thought divorce was a moral failing. The uncles who believed kids bounce back. The cousins who would go home and replay this conversation over dinner. I pressed my fingers around the cup so hard the plastic warped slightly, the lemonade sloshing dangerously close to the rim. "I'm allowed to disagree with your choices," I said quietly. "That doesn't mean I'm not moving on." He leaned back in his seat, draping an arm over the backrest, his smile wide and bright and utterly false. "See?" he said to the others. "Drama." Laughter bubbled around the table. Not loud, but enough. Enough to tell me exactly where I stood in that moment. There it was, being mocked by my own child as an unreasonable, outdated nuisance in front of people who shared my blood. That particular sting stays long after the sound fades. In the car on the way home, my daughter drove in silence for several miles. The sun was setting, painting the horizon in streaks of orange and pink, but it felt like someone else's sky. "He did that on purpose," she finally said. "I know," I replied. "Why didn't you say more?" she asked, frustration bleeding into her voice. I looked at my hands, resting in my lap. The skin on the backs of them was thinning, the veins more visible than they used to be. "Because he wanted a scene," I said. "I'm not giving him one." She tightened her grip on the steering wheel, knuckles whitening. "He humiliated you." "I know," I said again. The words hung between us, heavy and bitter. There was nothing else to add. As the wedding date got closer, the pattern sharpened. Texts from him became shorter, more hostile. Calls, when they came, were less about conversation and more about demands. One evening, he stopped by the house unannounced. It was late. The sky outside was already dark, the street lamp casting a harsh cone of light on the patchy front lawn. I was at the dining table, sorting through a pile of mail, when the door opened without a knock. He came in wearing a branded hoodie and that familiar, restless energy. His jaw was clenched, a faint shadow of stubble darkening his cheeks. "What's this?" he asked, tossing an envelope onto the table. I recognized it instantly. It was one of the small white envelopes I'd started using again, the cheap kind in bulk. This one held a check I'd written to help his ex-wife with the kids' school fees. She had slipped the envelope into his bag by mistake when he'd picked the kids up. "She told me she mixed it in with their homework," I said. "It was for their field trip. She didn't want them to miss it." His nostrils flared. "So now you're paying her bills behind my back?" "I'm helping my grandchildren," I replied. She didn't ask. I offered. He slapped his palm flat on the table, hard enough to make the mail jump. The lamp overhead swung slightly from the force, the light shifting across the tabletop in restless arcs. "You're undermining me," he said. "You're making her think she doesn't need me." I stared at the envelope. It was so small, thin, almost weightless. The ink from my pen had bled slightly at the edges of my name on the check. It was nothing compared to the stacks of papers I'd signed for him when he was younger, yet this was the one he chose to be offended by. "She needs stability," I said quietly. "So do the kids. If I can provide some of that, I will." "What about me?" he demanded. "Don't I deserve support?" The question would have broken my heart years earlier. Now it felt like a trap. "You're their father," I said. "You had a different kind of support from me for a long time." His eyes went cold. He grabbed the envelope, crumpling it in his fist. "You know what?" he said. "If you're not on my side, you're against me. And if you keep choosing her, don't be surprised when I make some choices of my own." A silence dropped between us, thick, suffocating, buzzing with unspoken threats. The refrigerator hummed behind me. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice and then went quiet. My heart pounded in my ears. "What choices?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He leaned in slightly, his expression flat. "She only lives here because I haven't pushed," he said. "Those kids only see you as much as they do because I let them. You think they're yours. Think again." The room tilted. He straightened, smoothing the front of his hoodie as if he'd just mentioned something as casual as the weather. "You're overreacting," he added, almost bored. "I'm just telling you how it is." He tossed the crumpled envelope back on the table, the paper now wrinkled and warped. The check inside was probably bent in two. Then he turned and walked out, leaving the door slightly ajar. The cold night air slipped in through the opening, brushing across my ankles. I sat frozen, staring at the envelope that had once held a small act of kindness and now lay there like evidence of a crime. That was the collapsing moment. The brief hope that I could quietly support everyone, crushed under the heel of his resentment. After that, every interaction felt like walking through a house with invisible tripwires. He'd show up late for pickups and act offended when I mentioned the time. If I offered him food, he'd smirk and say, "What, you feel guilty now?" If I asked about the kids' schedules, he'd sigh dramatically, complain to others that I was controlling, that I wanted to manage his life. Sometimes he didn't say anything at all. Those were the worst. He'd stare at his phone during family dinners, thumb scrolling while conversations swirled around him. If I asked a question, he'd respond with a grunt or a half shrug, eyes never leaving the screen. The silence after my attempts at connection felt louder than any insult, once. During a Sunday lunch, my granddaughter tried to show him a drawing. She held it up to his face, bouncing on her toes, her eyes shining. "Daddy, look, it's us," she said. "You and me and Grandma and my brother at the park." He glanced at it for half a second, then set it down beside his plate without really seeing it. "Uh-huh," he murmured, still tapping at his phone. The drawing lay there, bright colors on cheap paper, slowly soaking up a small ring of spilled soda. I watched the ink blur at the edges of the crayon lines, the figures she'd drawn bleeding into one another. My granddaughter's shoulders slumped. She slid into her chair, suddenly quiet. The room filled with a heavy kind of stillness, the sound of utensils against plates suddenly too loud. That silence did more damage than any shouted criticism could have. By the time the wedding invitation arrived, thick, embossed, shimmering as if they'd poured all their attention into the paper instead of the people it affected, the erosion was almost complete. The card was heavy in my hand, their names intertwined in an elegant script, the date printed in gold. My thumb brushed over the letters, and I thought of the first time I'd written his name on a permission slip, how careful I'd been with each stroke. He came by that night, standing in my doorway with his fiancée at his side. The hallway light cast hard shadows across his jaw, sharpening his features. She smelled like some expensive floral perfume, sweet and cloying. "So," he said, not bothering with pleasantries, "you got the invitation." "I did," I said. "And?" His fiancée smiled tightly. "It would mean a lot to us if you'd be there. It's a new beginning." I looked between them, one pair of eyes practically daring me to say no, the other hoping I'd swallow everything and say yes. "I can't give my blessing to a wedding that begins like this," I said softly. "Not after what you've done to your family." His jaw clenched. "So you're choosing her," he said, again. "I'm choosing what's right," I replied. He took a step closer, and for the first time, there was something genuinely dangerous in his expression. Not physical, but something colder, deeper. "You keep talking like that," he said, "and one day you'll find out what it really means to be left out." His fiancée reached for his arm, fingers wrapping around his wrist. "Let's go," she murmured. "We don't need this negativity." He didn't take his eyes off me. "I mean it," he said quietly. "You think this is bad now? You haven't seen anything yet." He turned and walked away, leaving the promise hanging in the air between us like a storm cloud that hadn't broken yet. For a long moment, I stood in the doorway, fingers pressed against the cool wood of the frame, watching his back disappear down the path. The porch light above me flickered, then steadied, casting a harsh, unforgiving glow over the crumpled invitation in my hand. I had no way of knowing then just how far he was willing to go to prove his point, but I was about to find out. The snap didn't come with shouting. It didn't come with a slammed door or an accusation hurled across a room. It came in the smallest, quietest moment, one that should have been ordinary. The week after the wedding, my daughter and I stopped by my former daughter-in-law's apartment to bring the kids a few new books and check how they were settling back into their routines. The building was old, the hallways narrow and painted a dull beige that had begun to peel around the edges. The scent of someone's cooking, garlic, onions, hung in the air. When she opened the door, the warm smell of laundry detergent drifted out, soft and familiar. The kids ran to us immediately. My granddaughter leapt into my arms, her hair in two little pigtails, her smile wide. My grandson tugged at my pant leg, waving a plastic dinosaur. Everything felt strangely normal for a minute. Then she handed me something. "Your son dropped this off earlier," she said, her voice careful. "He said it was for you." I took it without thinking. It was a small envelope, cheap white paper, unsealed, the flap slightly bent. For a moment my mind flashed back to that childhood letter he'd given me, the one where he'd apologized for breaking the vase, the way the pencil lines had wobbled with sincerity. But this envelope, this one felt different. My name wasn't written on the front. Instead, there was a printed document folded inside, its edges too crisp, too deliberate. I slid it out, the paper rasping softly against my fingertips. At first glance, it looked like a schedule, custody times, transfer points, pickup instructions. Then I read the title at the top, Revised Parental Access Guidelines, and just beneath it, in smaller type, Restrictions for Non-Compliant Extended Family Members. The words swam for a second before they settled into clarity. He had submitted a new proposal, one that named me specifically. One that stated I would no longer be allowed unsupervised time with my grandchildren. One that recommended distanced visitation due to my ongoing interference with primary parental authority. My breath left me in one long, shaky exhale. He filed this? My voice felt thin, papery. She nodded, looking stricken. He said it was just a formality, but I've never seen anything like this before. My daughter stared at the paper over my shoulder. Her hand flew to her mouth. "He's punishing you," she whispered. "He really meant what he said." I couldn't speak. I looked down at the document again. The ink was dark, sharply printed. There was no room between the lines, no softness anywhere on the page. Someone in an office somewhere had typed this as if it were just another assignment in a stack. But to me, it was a blow straight to the center of my chest. My grandchildren tugged at my sleeves, asking if we could read them their new books. My granddaughter pressed her cheek against my arm, soft and trusting. I looked at her tiny hand curled around my shirt, then back at the paper where my son had effectively declared me unsafe. Something inside me shifted. It was small at first, almost undetectable. A tightening, a gathering, a slow burn of clarity igniting deep under the surface of all the bruised places. The years I'd supported him, the envelopes I'd signed, the sacrifices I never named, the loyalty I had offered without condition, and now he had written me out of his children's lives with a single motion of a pen. "I won't let this stand," I said quietly. My voice surprised me. Steady, low, not trembling anymore. A strange calm settled into my bones, a stillness that wasn't emptiness but resolve. My daughter turned to me sharply. "Mom?" "No," I said, folding the paper slowly, deliberately. "This is where it changes." I slipped the document back into the envelope, smoothing the flap even though it would never close fully again. The kids laughed behind me, their voices bright and oblivious, filling the little living room with a warmth that shouldn't have hurt as much as it did. My former daughter-in-law touched my arm lightly. "I'm so sorry," she murmured. "I never wanted any of this." "I know," I said. "This isn't your doing." But as I stood there, the envelope crinkling faintly in my hand, the weight of everything fell into place, like a puzzle I had been refusing to see all at once. This wasn't about my choice to skip the wedding. This wasn't even about last night or the post he'd made online. This was about control. He needed to punish someone for the unraveling of his life, and I was the closest target who wouldn't fight back. But that was the mistake he'd made. He thought I wouldn't. I looked around the small room, the toys scattered on the rug, the small shoes by the door, the lunch plates drying by the sink. A quiet fierceness rose inside me, steady and undeniable. "I'm not losing them," I said. My throat tightened, but the words stayed firm. "And I'm not letting him bully his way into rewriting the truth." My daughter exhaled slowly, a mix of sorrow and relief. "So what do we do?" she asked. I folded the envelope once, then again, the paper stiff under my fingers. "We start preparing," I said. At that moment, a car door slammed outside, loud, sharp, and too close. All three of us turned. Footsteps approached the building, quick and heavy. My heart beat once, hard, then again, because I knew that stride, I knew that rhythm. He was coming up the stairs, and whatever he had to say next, I knew it wouldn't be kind. He didn't knock. His footsteps stopped outside the apartment door, a long, bracing silence settling over the small living room. My daughter's eyes flicked to mine, wide, tense, waiting. My former daughter-in-law stepped back instinctively, her hand hovering near her son, as if she could shield him from whatever was coming through the walls. A breath. Another. Then the handle turned. He walked in like he owned the air inside the room. His jaw was tight, a thin line of anger stretching across his face. He didn't greet the kids, didn't look at his ex-wife. His eyes landed directly on me, and for a moment it felt like he was seeing something that wasn't even there, an enemy he'd already made up his mind about. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded. My daughter stepped forward. "You don't get to barge in here and—" He cut her off with a raised hand. "I wasn't talking to you." Everything in me went very still. My pulse thudded in my throat, but my voice, when it finally came, was calm. "What is it you think I'm doing?" I asked. He laughed without humor. "Don't play dumb. I know you saw the paperwork." He hadn't brought it up because he regretted it. He'd brought it up because he wanted to see how much damage it had done. My granddaughter tugged at her mother's shirt. "Daddy," she whispered. He ignored her. Something inside me tightened at that, a slow coil of resolve. "Why did you file it?" I asked. He snorted. "Maybe because you've been overstepping for months? Maybe because you think you get to decide what's best for my kids? Maybe because you're turning everyone against me?" "You're doing that yourself," my daughter shot back. His head whipped toward her, eyes sharp. "You're next if you keep inserting yourself." That was the moment the youngest child began to cry. Softly at first, then harder when he realized no one was speaking gently anymore. His sister clutched his hand, her own face beginning to tremble. Their mother scooped them both close. "You need to lower your voice," she said quietly. He didn't even glance her way. Instead, he took 3 steps toward me. "Here's how this is going to go," he said. "You're going to stay out of my marriage, stay out of my divorce, stay out of my parenting. And if you want to see the kids, you'll see them when I decide you've earned it." The words hit me like cold water. Earned it. Like 3 decades of sacrifice could evaporate in one choice he didn't like. Like my entire motherhood could be re-evaluated by someone who had barely started living his. I felt something shift inside me, not anger, not grief, something quieter, colder, like the last remaining thread between us had finally snapped. "You can't control the truth forever," I said softly. He scoffed. "Watch me." He turned, grabbed the doorknob, and left as abruptly as he'd come. The echo of the door closing, sharp, final, seemed to vibrate through the room long after the sound itself faded. For a moment, no one spoke. The kids clung to their mother. My daughter's hands shook with fury she didn't know where to put. And I felt a kind of clarity settle into place, inch by inch, like the world had finally shifted into its true shape. This wasn't just a feud or a misunderstanding. He was escalating, and I would need more than hurt feelings to protect those children from the fallout. I reached for the folded envelope in my coat pocket. "Mom," my daughter whispered. "What now?" I smoothed the paper once, then slid it back into the pocket. "Now," I said, "we start documenting everything." That night, after the children were asleep and the apartment had fallen into a cautious quiet, the 3 of us sat around the small dining table. A single lamp glowed in the corner, soft, warm light, the kind that didn't judge. Outside, a dog barked once, then silence. My former daughter-in-law wrapped her hands around a mug of tea, the steam curling upward. "Do you really think it could get worse?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "And that's why we have to be ready." My daughter pulled out her laptop, hands still trembling slightly. "Okay, what are we preparing for?" I took a breath. "A custody fight," I said, "or a smear campaign, or both." Her eyes widened. "You think he would drag us into court?" "He already tried," I replied, tapping the folded envelope between us. This wasn't a warning. It was a first step. My former daughter-in-law closed her eyes, her shoulders tensing as though bracing for impact. "He'll make me look crazy," she murmured. "He always did when we argued." "He'll try," I said gently. "But there's truth on our side, and there's evidence everywhere he doesn't realize he's left." My daughter leaned forward. "Like what?" "The documents," I said. "The ones I've saved." Her eyebrows lifted. "You still have all of those?" I nodded. Every bill, every school form, every letter, every message where he promised something and didn't follow through, every day he didn't support his family and blamed someone else for it. My former daughter-in-law blinked. "You kept all that?" "I didn't keep them for this," I said quietly. "I kept them because they were part of raising him. They were pieces of our life." I hesitated. "But they're also proof now." My daughter began typing rapidly, creating a new folder on her screen. "We need a timeline," she said, "from the beginning of their marriage to now." "We also need copies of everything he's posted online," I added. "Every accusation, every attempt to rewrite the story." She sighed. "He posts constantly." but I can pull everything from the last month. And we'll need statements, I continued, from people who've seen him escalate, from anyone who's witnessed how he speaks about her, from anyone who's seen how he treats the kids. My former daughter-in-law lowered her mug slowly, as if absorbing it all at once. This is a lot. It is, I admitted, but it's necessary. A long silence stretched between us, not a hostile one, one thick with realization. She lifted her hand to her face, covering her mouth for a moment. When her voice came, it was soft. I never wanted this. I didn't want a war. I reached across the table and rested my hand over hers. No one wants a war, I said. But sometimes, when someone keeps crossing lines, you have to draw one they can't step over without consequences. My daughter squeezed her other hand gently. "We're going to do this right," she said. "We're going to build something he can't twist." A faint tremor ran through her ex-wife's shoulders. "I'm scared he'll take the kids from me," she whispered. My chest tightened. He won't. He doesn't have the stability, the temperament, or the record. And underneath all his threats, he doesn't actually want the responsibility. He wants control. "And an audience," my daughter added. "Don't forget that part." I nodded slowly. "Yes, that too." We sat there for a long moment, quietly breathing in the stillness, the weight of preparation settling onto the table with our empty cups and folded shadows. Then I stood. "I need to get home," I said. "There are boxes in my garage I need to go through, papers I haven't looked at in years." My daughter glanced up. "You think you'll find something useful?" "I think," I said carefully, "that I'll find everything we need." At home, the house felt too quiet. My husband was asleep already, the hallway light dimmed to a soft glow spreading across the carpet. The garage door creaked slightly when I opened it, metal bending like an old spine. The air inside was cool and faintly dusty. Boxes lined the shelves, some labeled, some left blank because I had assumed I'd remember. Time had softened the cardboard edges, yellowed some of the tape. I moved slowly from one box to another, lifting lids, breathing in the faint smell of old paper, ink, glue, the scent of years pressed flat and stored away. In the third box from the corner, I found it, a stack of folders, receipts, doctor's notes, school letters, employment records. Old messages I'd printed when he was in college and couldn't pay his phone bill, asking for help. And near the bottom, a file labeled in my own handwriting, "For emergencies." I sat down on the concrete floor, the cold seeping through my jeans, and opened it. Inside were documents I'd forgotten existed, things I'd filed away because a mother's instinct sometimes knows what her heart doesn't yet understand. His early counseling records, a summary of his first marital separation attempt, a note from a guidance counselor when he was 16, warning that he had trouble accepting responsibility for his actions, a signed agreement acknowledging financial support terms, unsent letters, mine to him, his to me. I lifted the envelope he'd written in childhood, the apology note about the vase. The once white paper had yellowed softly. The pencil faded but still readable. It had felt like love then. Now in my hands, it felt like the first chapter of a story that had gone somewhere neither of us expected. I closed my eyes, letting the crinkle of the paper settle against my palm. A faint ache spread through my chest, not regret exactly, but recognition, the kind that sits heavy and honest. He wasn't always like this, but he was like this now, and the difference mattered. I opened my eyes. In the stillness, surrounded by the evidence of decades, I felt something inside me lock into place, a quiet strength rising from a deep, old well I hadn't touched in years. There was no turning back now. We weren't stepping into a fight. We were preparing for a truth to be revealed, and when it came, he would not be ready for the weight of it. A faint vibration startled me, the phone on the shelf lighting up in the dim. A new message, from a number I recognized, from someone I didn't expect. We need to talk. It's about your son." I stared at the screen, breath catching. Whoever it was, whatever they knew. This was the beginning of something that would change everything. I saw the message just as I was standing up from the garage floor, my knees stiff from sitting too long. The glow from the phone screen cut a thin line of light across the boxes. I didn't recognize the number at first, not until I opened the text and saw the signature at the bottom. It was from my son's former marriage counselor. The same woman he'd insisted was biased, the same one he claimed didn't understand men, the same one he'd stopped seeing because she kept taking his wife's side. I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling the quiet around me thicken. "We need to talk. It's about your son. It's important." My hands tightened around the phone. Something cold slipped down my spine. A premonition, maybe. Or simply the recognition that whatever this was, it would not be small. I called her. She answered immediately. "Thank you for calling back," she said. Her voice was steady, firm, but there was an undercurrent to it. Fatigue or sadness or the weight of something she'd been carrying alone. "What's going on?" I asked. There was a pause, a shift in the air. "I shouldn't be saying this," she said quietly. "But circumstances being what they are, I felt you should know. Your son reached out to me last week." My breath caught. "Why?" "He wanted a written statement for court," she said. "He wanted me to say he was stable, cooperative, and consistently responsible during counseling." My stomach tightened. "But that's not true." "No," she said, "it's not." I heard a soft inhale, the sound of someone deciding to continue even though they understood the consequences. "He tried to pressure me," she said, "to sign something he wrote, something that painted his ex-wife as manipulative and unfit. He was agitated. He mentioned punishing people who get in his way." My thumb went numb where it pressed against the phone. "I refused," she said. "And I wanted you to know that if he's escalating like this, you need to be careful. All of you." The stillness in the garage felt sharper now, like the kind of silence before glass breaks. "Thank you," I whispered. "Truly." "Please prepare yourselves," she said. "He's not thinking clearly and he's not thinking kindly. I'm sorry, I wish it were different." When the call ended, I stood alone in the half-light, surrounded by years of documents, years of proof, years of trying to help him grow into someone better. He had chosen the opposite direction. And now, the truth wasn't something we could keep in this garage. It was something that needed to be brought into the open, carefully, but fully. The confrontation happened 3 days later, not in a courtroom, not in a lawyer's office, not even in one of our homes. It happened in a mediation room at the Family Services Building, neutral ground, beige walls, fluorescent lights that made everything look a little harsher. His ex-wife had been called in about the revised custody proposal he'd attempted to push through. My daughter came with me, her jaw tight, her hands clasped in her lap. My son arrived last. He walked in with a practiced confidence, his fiancée trailing half a step behind him. He wore a crisp shirt, sleeves rolled neatly, hair styled in a way meant to project control. But his eyes were sharp in the wrong way, a little too bright, a little too fixed. He barely glanced at me. The mediator, a soft-spoken woman in her 50s, began explaining the purpose of the meeting, but he cut in almost immediately. "I'm contesting her access," he said, jerking his head toward his ex-wife, "and my mother's, as already filed. They create instability. They interfere. You filed against me?" his ex-wife whispered, visibly shaken. "Why?" "Because you're ungrateful," he shot back. "Because you lie. Because you—" "Stop," I said. He went still. Slowly, he turned toward me, an unreadable expression in his eyes. "This is inappropriate," the mediator warned gently, but he ignored her. "You don't get to speak here," he said to me. "This is between parents." "No," I said softly. "This is between truth and whatever you've been telling yourself." His fiancée bristled. She's ruining everything. She always does. My daughter leaned forward, voice icy. You don't get to talk about my mother. The mediator raised her hands. We need to proceed one at a time. But something had shifted already. The room knew it. The air felt charged, brittle. My former daughter-in-law took a slow breath, her hands shaking slightly. What instability have I caused? She asked him carefully. Please explain it. You told my mother lies about me, he said. She told me what you did, I said, and I believed her because I know you. His face reddened. There, right there, you're taking her side. I'm taking the children's side, I said. His jaw flexed. You betrayed me. You betrayed your family, I whispered. A cold silence spread across the table. Then the mediator cleared her throat. Let's address the proposed restrictions. Can you explain why you believe your mother should have supervised visitation only? He smiled, a small, sharp curl of the lip. Because she enables my ex-wife, because she undermines my decisions, because she doesn't respect me. I felt that last sentence settle in the air between us, heavy, revealing. He didn't want a mother. He wanted obedience. The mediator turned to me. Do you have a response? I reached into my bag and carefully placed the envelope on the table, the one with his proposed restrictions, the one that had nearly broken me. I do, I said. He scoffed. What, you brought props? No, I said, sliding the envelope aside. I brought this. I placed the first document down, a copy of the agreement where he'd signed away financial obligations for months at a time, then the next, a summary of his refusal to seek continued counseling, then an email he'd sent blaming his wife for her own postpartum collapse, then 3 missed support payments documented by dates, then the note from his former counselor. Not her direct words, that would have broken professional ethics, but the summary she had provided stating clearly that she refused to support any narrative of him being consistently cooperative or responsible. His fiancée leaned forward, eyes widening. What is all this? Evidence, not of crimes, of patterns, a quiet life's worth of ignored responsibilities. The mediator skimmed the pages, her expression shifting second by second. My son watched her eyes, panic flickering behind irritation. No, he muttered. She's twisting everything. Those documents aren't... You filed against me, I said. You tried to take my grandchildren away. You walked into their mother's home and threatened all of us with what you could do. I didn't threaten anyone. You did, my daughter cut in. We were all there. His voice rose. This is ridiculous. You're turning this into some kind of attack. Your mother hasn't said one insult, the mediator said quietly. She's presenting documentation. You are reacting emotionally. Please sit down. He remained standing, chest heaving. His fiancée tugged at his sleeve. Sit, she whispered urgently. Sit down. People are staring. And they were. Staff passing by the open doorway slowed, sensing the tension. My son finally dropped into his chair, but his hands gripped the edge of the table hard enough that his knuckles whitened. This is a coordinated attack, he hissed. No, I said. This is accountability. His gaze snapped to mine, rage thick and trembling. You think you're so righteous, he spat. You think you're the hero in all this? You're pathetic. You're old. You're irrelevant. And you're jealous that I don't need you anymore. Silence. Even the air paused. The words hit with a force beyond volume. Not because they were cruel, he'd said cruel things before, but because this time they were careless. True to what he felt, not what he meant to perform. In that bare second, the mediator looked at him the way I had been looking at him for years, finally seeing. My former daughter-in-law covered her mouth, trembling. My daughter's eyes burned, but she didn't speak, and I felt something close inside me, quietly, permanently. You don't need me, I said softly, but your children do." He flinched. For the first time since the confrontation began, he actually flinched. The mediator folded her hands. "I'm going to make a formal recommendation," she said. "Based on the evidence presented today and the conduct displayed in this room, there is no grounds for restricting this grandmother's visitation rights. In fact, I see clear indications she provides stability where instability is present elsewhere." My son's head whipped toward her. "What?" "And regarding the children's mother," she continued, "there is substantial evidence she has acted consistently in their best interest. The court will not look kindly on attempts to weaponize the legal process." His face drained of its color. "This isn't fair," he whispered. But the room knew differently. "This is the truth," the mediator corrected. He pushed back from the table abruptly, the chair scraping the tile. His breathing was ragged, fast, almost uneven. The anger in him struggled to find a direction, a target. Then his eyes locked onto me, and something in them flickered. Rage, desperation, wounded pride. "You'll regret this," he said. The words stopped the entire room, not shouted, not dramatized, just cold. I met his gaze steadily. "No," I said. "I stopped regretting the truth a long time ago." He stared at me, chest rising and falling, and for a moment, just a moment, his expression collapsed, not into empathy, not into remorse, but into the hollow fear of someone watching their power slip. Then he turned and stormed out, the door slamming hard enough that the frame trembled. His fiancée followed, but not before giving me a look, confused, shaken, maybe even afraid. Silence fell again. His ex-wife exhaled sharply, pressing a hand to her chest. My daughter leaned against the wall, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. The mediator looked down at the documents, then at me. "That," she said quietly, "was the clearest moment of truth I've seen in my years doing this." But the room felt heavy, not victorious, just honest, because there was no triumph in watching someone unravel under the weight of their own choices, only clarity, and sometimes clarity hurt. The door at the end of the hall swung open suddenly, a staff member stepping in, papers in hand. I turned instinctively at the movement, a chill running up my spine, because in that second I realized something. My son was not done. He was regrouping, and whatever he planned next, it would not be gentle. I didn't realize how tightly I'd been holding my breath until we stepped outside the building. The air felt different out there, cooler, quieter, almost startling in its normalcy after everything that had happened inside. My daughter walked beside me, her hand brushing my arm every few steps as if making sure I was really still there. My former daughter-in-law trailed just a pace behind, the sunlight catching in her hair, her eyes swollen from holding tears back for too long. For a moment, no one spoke. The parking lot was half full, the distant hum of traffic rising and falling like a tide. A bird perched on a nearby lamppost, its feathers ruffling in the breeze, completely unaware that someone's whole family had just fractured on the other side of a beige brick wall. "Are you all right?" my daughter asked finally. I nodded, though my chest still felt hollow in places. "I will be." We stood there a little longer, letting the quiet settle around us, letting the dust of the confrontation fall where it needed to, letting ourselves breathe again after what felt like weeks of being underwater. My former daughter-in-law wiped her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, "for standing up today, for everything." I placed a hand on her shoulder, gentle but firm. "You're not alone in this," I said. "Not anymore. Not ever again, if I can help it." She let out a small, shaky laugh. I'm not used to people saying that and meaning it. "I know," I said. We walked her to her car. The kids were with a neighbor for the afternoon, and for once, the silence in the back seat didn't feel like a heavy absence. It felt like a necessary quiet before rebuilding. When she drove away, my daughter slid her arm through mine and rested her head lightly against my shoulder. "You were strong today," she murmured. "Stronger than I've ever seen you." I didn't answer at first. Strength wasn't the word I would have chosen. What I felt was older than strength. A tiredness that had teeth, a clarity that arrived only after love had been stretched, bent, thinned, and finally forced to become something steadier. "I didn't want it to be him," I said softly. "I didn't want to be the one who had to hold the truth up to his face." "I know," she said, "but someone had to." We drove home in quiet. The sun dipped low as we reached our street, washing everything in a soft light that made the houses look gentler, the trees less sharp. My husband was on the porch when we pulled in, hands tucked in his pockets, watching us with worry etched into his features. When we reached him, he simply opened his arms and I stepped into them. He didn't ask anything. He didn't say anything. He just held me. And the way his breath settled against my hair made something inside me loosen. Later, when the house grew still and the sky outside darkened to a deep blue, I went to our bedroom and reached into the drawer where I had placed the old envelope, the one with the note my son wrote when he was 7. The paper was yellowed now, creased in ways that told its own history. I held it for a moment, letting my thumb skim the pencil grooves where his small hand once pressed too hard. "I love you more than the Voss," the letter had said. Tonight, those words landed differently, not as nostalgia, not as hurt, as clarity. He had loved me with a child's heart once. Big, bright, uncomplicated. Somewhere along the way, adulthood had tangled that love with pride, resentment, blame, and fear. But the letter wasn't a promise of who he would become. It was a memory of who he once was, and I could mourn the distance without losing myself to it. I set the envelope back into the drawer, not as an anchor of pain anymore, but as a reminder of boundaries I had earned the right to hold. Downstairs, the dishwasher hummed. The faint smell of dinner lingered in the air. My daughter laughed at something on the television, the sound drifting lightly through the house, warm and steady. Life felt different, but not broken. The next morning, just after sunrise, a message arrived on my phone. Not from him, from his ex-wife. A photo. The kids, smiling, messy-haired, sitting at the breakfast table with 2 bowls of cereal and a note beside them that said, "Grandma would be proud of us today." It wasn't about me. It wasn't even about the mediation. It was about her reclaiming a small piece of safety. The children reclaiming a small piece of joy. And me, reclaiming a part of myself I'd nearly buried under years of trying to keep a fragile piece. I sat on the edge of my bed, the morning light slipping softly through the curtains, and felt something settle into place. Quiet, steady, unmistakably mine. Peace, in its simplest form. Not because everything was solved, not because everything was forgiven, but because the truth was no longer something I needed to hide inside my chest. Later that afternoon, my daughter found me in the kitchen, sorting recipe cards into neat stacks. "Mom?" she asked. "What happens now?" I smiled at her, tired, warm, honest. "Now," I said, "now we live, and we let the pieces fall where they're meant to." She stepped forward and hugged me, her head resting against my shoulder. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. I closed my eyes briefly, letting the words settle. For the first time in a long time, they didn't sting. They didn't ache. They felt deserved. When evening came and the house quieted, I returned to that old envelope one more time, lifting it gently from the drawer. It felt different now, lighter somehow. What once symbolized everything I had poured into motherhood now reminded me of what I still had left to offer the world. Steadiness. Truth. A quiet kind of love that didn't bend just because someone tried to break it. If this story touched you, let me know. Sometimes sharing what we've lived through reminds us how deeply resilience can grow in the places where our hearts once hurt the most. Have you ever carried something heavy and found clarity only after setting it down? If so, you can tell me. I'm listening.